The door creaked softly, deliberately. Not the hesitant kind, not the wind brushing wood, but the purposeful pressure of someone entering a place they didn't belong. I froze in the shadowed hallway, bare feet glued to the cold wood. My heart kicked against my ribs like it wanted to run without me. It was nearly midnight, the hour when ghosts are said to walk, and yet what stepped through my door wasn't a phantom. It was worse. Someone had used a key. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers, pulling up the app for the security camera I'd installed just 6 weeks ago. The video feed loaded slowly, the spinning icon almost taunting me. Then there it was, a shadowed figure crossing my living room. Not masked. Not gloved. Familiar. Too familiar. My mother. Behind her came 2 more figures, one slim and tall, dragging a tote bag behind her, the other clutching a folder in one hand, a clipboard in the other. Camille. And someone I didn't recognize. The stranger was speaking as she walked, gesturing toward my dining nook, nodding at the hardwood floors I'd spent 2 weekends sanding and polishing until my hands blistered. My mother pointed toward the hallway with that air of ownership she always carried into places she never paid for. I crouched beside the hallway wall, invisible in my own home, watching the invasion unfold in real time. My throat was dry. I couldn't even cry. I was afraid, yes, but more than that, I was undone. Because the house was supposed to be mine. Only mine. And they didn't even ask. It hadn't started with a secret, not intentionally. It started with absence. With being unseen. My name is Claire Harding. I'm 36 years old, single, no children, no dramatic backstory except for the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't make headlines, just internal scars. In my family, silence was survival. I was the easy one, the one who didn't ask, didn't complain, didn't require. While my siblings, Evan and Rosalind, let my parents pave their way, I lived on less. I learned to stretch a bag of rice for days, said no to trips, dinners out, even birthday gifts. I worked full-time at a dental clinic cleaning teeth, smiling through the grind. Nights and weekends I lugged camera equipment to weddings, graduations, baby showers, capturing strangers' joy with aching feet and eyes that barely stayed open. But it added up. Slowly. Quietly. Every dollar was a brick in my invisible wall of independence. Then my grandmother passed and left me $78,904. I tucked it into a savings account I told no one about, not because I was hiding it, but because no one asked. No one ever asked. The house came into my life on a rainy Tuesday in October. A listing I clicked on accidentally. A 2-bedroom bungalow on the edge of Glenmont, where the houses sag a little and the sidewalks crack, but the trees bloom thick in spring. The photos were unremarkable. But when I stood in the doorway, musty air, chipped tile, crooked cabinets, I felt something hum beneath my ribs. Not beauty, not excitement, but recognition. This house was tired, unloved, overlooked, just like me. I closed on it 32 days later. Alone. No one clapped. No one cheered. I signed with hands that smelled of latex gloves and development fluid, still tired from a 14-hour double shift. The realtor asked, "Is there anyone else who should be here today?" I smiled and said, "Just me." I kept my apartment, told coworkers I was helping a friend renovate. That friend was me. My weekends became sacred. I'd drive to Maplewood Drive with thermoses of coffee and a playlist that ranged from Bon Iver to Alanis Morissette. I painted walls, fixed the sink, learned to install shelves. I hung curtains. Green, linen, soft. I chose a dark olive for the bedroom because it made the rain feel cinematic. I found a cracked antique mirror at a yard sale and polished it until I could see my whole face in the frame. No one critiqued it. No one sighed at my choices. No one reminded me, with tight smiles, that I was still single. It was mine. All mine. Until it wasn't. Until the day my mother, Camille, and a stranger walked into my home like it was a showroom. Until the note she left written on the back of a grocery store receipt landed on my console like a thread in cursive. This place is far too big for you. Think about what's really practical. You'll understand one day. Until the word nursery was said aloud by a stranger in my second bedroom. The one I'd dreamed of turning into a photo studio. Until I realized that giving someone a key in a moment of weakness might one day cost you everything. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply shut down. Like I'd done so many times before. But this time, something in me twisted. This time, the quiet I'd lived with for years turned into something sharper. Not rage. Not grief. Resolve. They thought I would stay quiet. They were wrong. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in the small bedroom with its olive green walls and second-hand nightstand, eyes wide open in the dark, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house, each one sounding unfamiliar, like the place itself was unsettled. I turned the note over in my hands until the paper softened and curled at the corners. Her words played on a loop inside my skull, their weight far heavier than the ink they were written in. Far too big for you. As though space, effort, and accomplishment could only be legitimate if shared with someone else. As though solitude somehow invalidated ownership. The next morning, I didn't shower. I didn't change. I wrapped myself in my oldest hoodie, the one with holes near the sleeves, and sat cross-legged on the living room floor, staring at the blank wall where I'd once imagined hanging a gallery of my photographs. I opened the security footage again, not because I didn't believe what I'd seen, but because I needed to feel the outrage, the betrayal, fully. I needed it to sink deep enough to replace the decades of self-doubt that my family had fed me one spoonful at a time. They had walked through my house like tourists. Worse, like landlords. As though I was merely holding the space until someone more deserving, more appropriate, came along. As though my life was just a placeholder for a narrative that better suited their idea of what success looked like. That day I called out of work, something I almost never did. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing the text. Migraine, I wrote. Won't make it today. No explanation. No apology. Just like the note she left me. Around noon, I drove to a hardware store 2 towns over. Not the one in my neighborhood, too risky, too close. I didn't want to run into anyone who might recognize me, who might ask why I was buying 5 deadbolts, 3 exterior-grade lock sets, and a security chain. I paid in cash, even though I didn't need to. It felt like part of the rebellion. I didn't install the locks that day. I waited. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to hold the keys in my hand a little longer before surrendering to the permanence of change. Once I changed the locks, I would have to face the confrontation. There would be no plausible deniability, no gentle deflection. It would be war. Instead, I cleaned. Not because the house was dirty, but because it gave me something to control. I scrubbed the baseboards with a toothbrush, dusted every corner of the ceiling, rearranged the spice rack, and then rearranged it again. I wiped down the light switches and door handles. I vacuumed the couch and fluffed the pillows. I made the bed in the guest room, then tore it down and made it again. I worked like someone expecting company, even though I knew I could not let anyone in. My phone buzzed in the late afternoon. A message from my mother. Do you still have the spare key I left at your apartment? I need to swing by and drop something off. I stared at the screen, ball rising in my throat. She didn't even acknowledge what had happened. No mention of the footage. No admission. No apology. Just a continuation of the narrative where I remain the side character in her play. I didn't respond. I turned off the phone, placed it face down, and went outside to the back steps. The air was crisp, the light softening as the sun slid lower. I pulled my knees to my chest and watched the trees sway. There was a time when I'd imagined sitting here with someone, maybe a friend, maybe more. Someone who'd see me fully. Someone who wouldn't assume the silence meant I had nothing to say. I sipped tea from a chipped mug and let the silence swell around me, not oppressive, but still heavy. It was the kind of silence that demanded something. A decision. A step. By nightfall, I had made my choice. The locks would change tomorrow. The locksmith arrived just after noon the next day, a stocky man with silver hair, callous fingers, and the kind of silence that didn't press in the wrong places. He didn't make small talk. He didn't ask questions. When I opened the door and said, "Full replacement, all exterior locks," he just nodded and got to work, laying out tools with practiced movements on the porch steps like a surgeon preparing for something sacred. I watched from the kitchen, arms folded tight, a silent sentry in the one place I thought I'd carved for myself. The metallic clicks and whirs of his drill sounded like punctuation in a sentence I hadn't yet spoken aloud. Each bolt that fell to the floor echoed louder than it should have, like a signal that something irreversible was happening. I could feel it in my bones, the tremor of boundaries finally drawn, of a version of myself being slowly dismantled and rebuilt in real time. When he handed me the new set of keys, they felt unfamiliar in my palm. He asked, "Only you with copies?" I nodded. "Only me." That night, I slept at the house again. Mattress still on the floor, curtains pulled halfway, the faint scent of fresh paint and wood polish lingering like memory. It was the first night in weeks I didn't flinch at shadows across the window or pause at creaks in the hallway. Not because I wasn't afraid anymore, but because fear was no longer the worst thing in the room. Silence was. For days passed with no calls, no knocks, no messages. Not from my mother. Not from Camille. Not from Evan. And that silence, at first liberating, began to harden into something colder. I thought I would feel victorious, unburdened, light. Instead, I felt suspended. Like I was floating in a room where everyone else had left without saying goodbye. Every minute stretched too long. I found myself organizing pantry shelves that were already alphabetized. I pulled weeds from garden beds I hadn't even planted yet. I wiped down cabinet doors twice in one morning just to hear the sound of something moving. On the fifth day, my phone buzzed. A text from Evan. "Mom's been really upset. Maybe you should reach out." I stared at the message, read it 3 times, each one landing with a sharper edge. Not a question. Not concern. Just a suggestion. A performance of neutrality. As if he hadn't benefited from my silence his whole life. As if he didn't know what she'd done, or worse, did know and didn't care. I didn't respond. 3 days later, a message from Rosalind. "Made your favorite, eggplant parmesan. Miss family dinners. Let's move on." I let it sit unopened for a day. When I did read it, I didn't reply. There was no mention of the house. No mention of the footage, the intrusion, the note. Just the expectation that I would bend again, return to my role, resume the story they'd all agreed I should follow. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted compliance. So I stayed quiet. One evening, I was sitting on the back steps with a blanket draped over my shoulders, mug of peppermint tea cooling between my hands, when the camera alert pinged. Motion detected. Driveway. My breath hitched. I walked inside and checked the feed. It was her. My mother stood on the front porch, a paper bag in one hand, her purse slung low on the other shoulder. She didn't knock. She tried the handle. It didn't turn. I saw her expression shift, subtle at first, then tightening around the mouth, a twitch in the brow. She knocked once, then twice louder. I didn't open the door. I waited. She stood there, expectant, like the door owed her something, like the space behind it had always belonged to her. Finally, I walked to the door but didn't open it. I spoke through the wood. You don't have a key anymore. A pause. Then her voice, measured, careful, the kind of calm that comes before manipulation. I figured. I didn't answer. I just wanted to talk, she said. We're talking. Through the narrow pane of glass, I saw her shift her weight, look sideways like someone expecting applause for showing up uninvited. I was only looking out for you, she said. No, I said, my voice steady. You were looking past me. Another pause. This isn't like you. You mean speaking up? You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being honest. You're going to regret this. You're throwing away your family over a house. I felt a sharp laugh rise in my throat, but it didn't escape. I kept it there like a shield. I'm not throwing anyone away, I said. You already did that when you used my key without permission and showed my home like it belonged to you. Her hand dropped from the doorframe. I raised you to be practical. No, I said, you raised me to be silent. She said nothing. Then, softly, you'll be alone. I've been alone, I replied. The difference is now it's on my terms. A long pause. Then footsteps retreating down the steps, gravel crunching under shoes that had no place on my porch to begin with. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I turned off the porch light, and for the first time I felt safe. The house was quiet again. Not the uneasy silence that had blanketed it after the invasion, but something stiller, thicker, like dust settling after a storm. After my mother left that day, there was no follow-up, no message, no attempt to smooth things over or reopen the conversation. Just absence. It surprised me how much that hurt. I had expected another wave of control disguised as concern, another passive-aggressive reminder that I had overreacted, that I was being cold, distant, ungrateful. But instead, there was only quiet. And while a part of me reveled in it, another part, one I rarely acknowledged, wondered if the silence wasn't punishment after all, but confirmation. Confirmation that I had stepped too far outside the script they'd written for me. I moved through the next week with the kind of robotic precision that comes from habit and emotional exhaustion. Wake, dress, clinic, edit, sleep, repeat. The camera ping slowed. My phone stayed silent. The air began to shift toward late autumn, the trees losing their leaves in slow spirals that blanketed the front yard like offerings from a season trying to soften the world. One evening, I stood by the living room window, holding a cup of chai, watching a child on a tricycle pedal down the street. Their mother followed slowly behind, arms crossed, scarf whipping in the wind. I wondered what that child would grow up remembering, if the mother would be recalled as safety or suffocation. If love in their world came with strings or scissors. I thought about mine. How she had always existed in this complex haze, one part caretaker, one part critic. How she made sure we had clothes for school, but also made comments about how mine never fit quite right. How she praised Evan's business instincts, but responded to my achievements with that faintly puzzled smile, as if she couldn't quite figure out what I was aiming for. I realized that I had never once seen her surprised by me. Because to be surprised, you have to be paying attention. I set the chai down and walked through the house. Slowly, room by room. My footsteps echoed against the wood floors. I opened closet doors. I ran my fingers along the walls. I peeked into the guest room, where the sheets were still crisp from that afternoon I had made the bed out of ritual. I stepped into the second bedroom, the almost studio, and just stood there. The sunlight through the blinds cast striped shadows on the floor. I imagined again the nursery comment, the way that woman, Vanessa, the stager, had said it so casually, so decisively, as if my life's potential was a container to be emptied and repurposed. That word had haunted me. Nursery. Not because I didn't want one. Not because I did. But because it was assumed. Assigned. As if nothing I had done mattered unless it could house something else. That night, I printed photos. Not for anyone else, just for me. Shots I'd taken over the last few years and never shared. A crumbling church door in Nova Scotia. A child laughing in a fountain in Lisbon. A pair of hands, mine, stained with turmeric and sunlight. I framed them slowly, carefully, lining the hallway with memories I had made on my own, proof that I had existed fully, even if no one had ever clapped. The next morning, I found an envelope wedged beneath my mailbox. No name, no return address. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. If you're ready to talk, just say when. Camille. No flourish. No blame. Just the offer. I sat on the porch steps, the letter in one hand, my mug of lukewarm coffee in the other. I hadn't seen Camille since the footage. Since she'd stood in my hallway, laughing politely, complicit. But I remembered the way she had lingered near the kitchen, how she hadn't spoken much, how her eyes had scanned the space not with entitlement, but with hesitation. I wondered what her story had been that day. I didn't write back. Not yet. But that evening, I moved through the house again and, for the first time, imagined someone else there, not as an intruder, not as a threat, but as a guest. As a witness. Someone who might sit across from me in the living room and ask why I chose that olive green. Someone who might actually want to hear the answer. It startled me, that longing. Not for family. Not for validation. For connection. For someone to say, I see you. And mean it. I didn't want to unlock the door again. Not all the way. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, I could open it. An inch. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind that hovered somewhere between warm and cold, between sunlight and overcast, a day that didn't quite know what it wanted to be. I stood in the kitchen, slicing fennel for a salad I wasn't sure anyone would eat, the anise scent clinging to my fingers. There were lentils simmering on the stove, herb-roasted chicken in the oven, a loaf of bread cooling on the counter. I wasn't cooking for an apology. I wasn't hosting for closure. I was feeding my house. I was feeding myself. The windows were cracked open just enough to let in the fall breeze. Music played quietly from a speaker in the corner, instrumental, gentle, but persistent. The light was low, golden, and forgiving. I caught sight of my reflection in the kitchen window as I rinsed parsley under cool water, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I looked like someone standing in her own life. At 5:57, a car pulled into the driveway. My breath hitched. I wiped my hands on a towel, smoothed my shirt, and walked to the door. I didn't wait for the knock. I opened it just as Evan was raising his hand. He looked surprised. Camille stood beside him, holding a bottle of wine. Behind them came Rosalind, who waved awkwardly, and my father, who looked older than I remembered, smaller, quieter. Last was my mother. She didn't speak. She just looked at me, not through me, and I nodded once. Come in, I said. They entered slowly, like the house might reject them. Shoes came off. Coats were hung. Camille wandered to the living room, pausing at the wall of photos. Rosalind commented on the scent from the kitchen. My father found a chair near the window and sat quietly. Evan looked everywhere but at me. I had set the table with mismatched plates and thrifted cloth napkins, a conscious choice. Nothing too polished, nothing too curated. Just real. I poured water into glasses and passed around dishes. No one fought over the bread. No one raised their voice. It was surreal. Dinner was quiet at first. Polite. Careful. They complimented the food. I let them. Rosalind asked about my photography. I answered. Evan mentioned a new client. I nodded. No one brought up the house. No one brought up the note. Until my mother, halfway through her second helping of lentils, set her fork down. You've done a lot here, she said. I waited. It's beautiful. Not an apology, but something. Thank you, I said. She looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't. Instead, she pushed her plate forward slightly and folded her hands in her lap. There was a long silence then, not heavy, but full. After dinner, I offered a short tour. It felt strange, showing them the space now that it was completely mine, no apologies, no hesitations. Camille lingered in the studio room, running her fingers along the windowsill. She turned and said, "It gets amazing light in here." I nodded. It's where I do most of my editing now. Evan paused in the bedroom, his eyes falling on the mirror. "This used to be Grandma's," he said. I nodded. She gave it to me before she passed. He looked at me then, and for once, he didn't look away. "I never knew," he said, "about any of this." I know. We returned to the living room. They stayed longer than I expected. No one checked their phones. My father dozed off in the chair briefly, waking with a small start, and everyone chuckled gently. Camille asked if she could see the backyard. Rosalind offered to help with dishes. I declined. At the door, my mother hesitated. She pulled something from her purse, a small box. "I found this," she said. "Thought you might want it." Inside was a key. The old one. I looked at it, then at her. "I don't need it," I said. She nodded. Her hand trembled slightly as she slipped it back into her coat. "But thank you for returning it." We stood in silence a moment longer. Then she reached out, not for the door, but for me. A light touch on my arm. Nothing more. They left. I closed the door behind them, turned the lock. And for the first time, it didn't feel like defense. It felt like peace. The text started again in the weeks that followed. Not often. Not demanding. Just enough. Rosalind sent a photo of her garden. Evan forwarded an article about camera drones. Camille asked for a soup recipe. Even my mother once sent a message, "How's the photo studio coming along?" I answered sometimes. Not always. I wasn't performing. I wasn't returning to the old script. I was rewriting it, line by line, at my pace. Because now I understood that silence wasn't the absence of love. It was the presence of self. And this house, these walls, these windows, this life, I had built it. Not in their shadow, but in my own light. The olive walls didn't ask me to explain myself. The mismatched furniture didn't whisper comparisons. The photos on the hallway wall reminded me who I was when no one was watching. It would take time. It might never be perfect. But for the first time, I wasn't waiting for permission to belong. I already did.